Welcome back to another episode of the Collaborative IEP podcast. I'm Ashley Barlow, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. 1416, we have made it. We are trickling down to the bottom of part B of IDEA, and we have made it to section 1416. This is the first section in a second that we are not breaking into different parts for podcast episodes. We're going to get all the way through 1416 in this episode. We're also going to do this a little bit differently than we've done in the past. We're still going to go section by section, but I'm just going to, like subparagraph by subparagraph, right? Because we're going to do section 1416 of IDEA today. It is about a boring topic, but I'm going to try to make it applicable to things that would actually make sense to you and like reasons why we should care about this. But I'm going to do it more by overview for you because like going into each little provision of this is pretty inapplicable to parents. So to the extent that you need anything in here, I hope to kind of give you like a lay of the land, general landscape, and then to summarize for you so that if you need it, you can go in yourself and look at the specific provisions. I have to say that doing this has, when we started off, I think in our first episode or around the beginning, I said, it's been a second since I've read IDEA front to back. And doing so has helped me immensely. I live in IDEA. I am constantly pulling out provisions and looking at specific things. But, what attorneys do is we pull it up online, we hit a control find, and we look for the part that applies to us, or we know that we need to go into a certain section, and then we're looking in the certain section for a specific nuance or where a comma is or something like that. And so reading it front to back has given me nice insight. I have used things that I have gone over with you in this podcast, in this series, in IEP meetings. I have used it in discussions with parents. I have used it to kind of like reroute the way that I might advise somebody. And so I'm really enjoying this kind of re-look. And I really do encourage you to look at the actual law and to see if there are things that you can pull out of it from time to time. So today we're going to go into 1416. We're going to set the landscape. Oh man, I just got a thumbs up. You know how like this happens on Zoom too. I record these on an application called Tella, but I just got like I did a thumbs up and then it gave a thumbs up. Now I'm giving a thumbs up and it's not. Anyway, that was fun. Okay. So a correction, like in the newspaper when they say last week we said blah, 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 and we actually meant to say yada, yada, yada. Well, here's my correction. I planned wrong. And your newsletter last week said that Griffin was graduating today. Today was last Tuesday. And actually, Griffin's graduating today, this Tuesday. I don't know why it matters, but I felt like I lied to you. And so I wanted for you to know. So today is the day that I'm feeling all the feels. And, something that kind of hits in graduation season is like your default emotion. So, a default emotion that I feel a lot, and I'm going to tie this into IEP advocacy because I think this is important. I think our defaults are really important. A default emotion that I feel often is gratitude. I almost kind of even get like stuck in gratitude. So, as I think about graduation, no matter what kind of triggers the thought, like I got a picture of his diploma one day this week, as it was getting signed at the board office, somebody was like, hey, here you go. I get invitations to parties. Somebody asks, oh, are you excited? Are you in all your fields? Or I get a text from a friend saying, I'm in my field. Our friends are graduating from other high schools. And so I'm like, experiencing those things. We're hitting lasts, like last day of class, last day of this, or like senior passage stuff. Like in our school district, the kids go on a riverboat cruise because we live so close to downtown Cincinnati and the Ohio River, and they go on a little cruise. And that's something that my husband did the year ahead of me. We are not high school sweethearts, but we've been friends our entire lives. So he was in the class ahead of me at the high school where our kids go, and then I did it, and now Griffin's getting to do it. Each time that that happens, I kind of go to this, like, reminiscent feeling that is really founded in gratitude. I'm so grateful for many things. So, just to give you a little context, although this is kind of immaterial, but I am so grateful for our community. I was texting a neighbor today. I'm borrowing her tables and chairs for the graduation party, and she of course said, "How are you doing?" And I was like, I'm grateful for our little street. We have this little cul-de-sac where he learned how to ride a bike, and in front of her house his front tire hit a pothole, and I have this hilarious memory of him running down the street saying, "Dislocated elbow," and he's, like, not an overreactor, so it still is a funny memory. And so I have these gratitude-based emotions, and I don't think I'm sad. I'm not sad that it's over, so to speak, but I'm really grateful for the educators and the experiences and the places and the the other people and the environments that have given him the foundation for the next step, because that's where we're heading, right? Is the next step. And the next step is a step. And then there's a step, and then there's a step. And I'm 47 years old, and I'm still on this learning trajectory that's called life. And so how does that translate into IEP advocacy? An emotion that I feel at IEP tables when I am communicating with my own IEP team, when I am communicating on behalf of other IEP teams, kind of a baseline for me is gratitude. I start a lot of conversations in gratitude. I do a lot of things out of gratitude. I express gratitude. And those things are all like super duper natural to me, and so here's the lesson that I wanna convey in that. The lesson this is like a preamble to section 1416. This little discussion has nothing to do with 1416, by the way, but it's timely, and it starts because I lied to you. So, I gratitude is a true emotion to me. I think it's really important that we as humans identify emotions or core beliefs or like universal truths that are true to us, and that we allow those things to naturally occur, that we don't stifle them, and that we capitalize on them. So, I talk about gratitude a lot in IEP meetings because there's kind of this discussion in our circle, like, do you take treats to a meeting or do you not? I'm a grateful person. I want to celebrate the things that people do. I want to celebrate people's commitment to my kid. And so I take treats to meetings. There are all kinds of other people that are like, "I don't take treats. I don't have to buy their love. They're doing their job. I don't need to celebrate jack shit. They're doing their job." That's okay too, if that is true to you. I actually found teaching to be not particularly externally rewarding. Of course, it's internally rewarding. You see your kids grow every day. You see 100 light bulbs go off. You'll see when one of your strategies works. Now's probably a good time to say that the people are going to be home in my house. And so you're going to hear ice, you're going to hear nose blowing, you're probably going to hear explosions that Jack has created in the background in the summer. And so that's just what's going to happen. And so I take those things. So I take actually monthly treats to my teachers because I'm grateful for what they do, and I want them to know that they're appreciated. Hey, you're seen and you're appreciated, because that's natural to me and that strengthens my advocacy. Might not be that way to you. So if you are naturally skeptical, if you are naturally like really, really empathetic, if you are naturally fill in the blank emotion, allow those things to come into your advocacy in a functional, effective way. Okay. So you're going to learn about that through other ways. Like I have right now highlighted my innate gratitude through these graduation experiences. And that's just one more life lesson that has highlighted that which lives inside of me. And then I have to think creatively about how that can positively impact my special education advocacy for my own kid and for others. And also, I have to think about how it might negatively do that and work strategies around that. Okay. So, little ditty today, and I like that. I like that we were able to turn that around. So, let's get the lay of the land in section 1416, and then I'm going to summarize our different sections. So 1416 is not terribly long. I like to tell you how many pages it is because I don't know, it just feels more tolerable that way. So it's about 5.5 pages on my printed document. Remember, I have the print view from the IDEA website, but it's not a very long section compared to the ones that we've done in the past. So the title of 1416 is Monitoring, Technical Assistance, and Enforcement. Yes, one thing that we're going to tie this episode to is the budget cuts that we have seen and the staffing cuts and the cuts on the government efficiency measures that the Trump administration has implemented to the Department of Education, specifically relative to this technical assistance component of this section of the law. So our title again is Monitoring, Technical Assistance, and Enforcement. And we only have A through I as our subsections. So I'll give you those titles so that we know where we are in the law. And then I'm just going to give you little blurbs about A, B, C, D, all the way through I. So we aren't going to go like word for word in here very often. A is called federal and state monitoring. So how are we looking at the effectiveness of this law and the implementation of this law in our departments of ed, state and federal? B is called state performance plans. So we're going to learn what those things are and how those work. C is called approval process. D is called secretary's review and determination. So what the federal Department of Ed has to do to kind of make sure states are doing what they are supposed to. E is called enforcement, which is pretty straightforward. F is called state enforcement. G is called rule of construction, which we get in almost every section. H is called divided state agency responsibility. Who else is going to weigh in here? And I is called data capacity and technical assistance review. So let's dive into subpart A. So bumping back up to subpart A, what section 1416A says is that the Secretary of the United States Department of Education has to implement and monitor, has to monitor the implementation of IDEA across the board. It has to do that at the federal level and has to do that at the state level. What she is looking at is general supervision of the states, state performance plans that we're going to get to here in a second. Hang on one second while I get my papers right. And then also, kind of with the purpose of looking at the results of different strategies and curricula and initiatives that the federal Department of Ed does, and then just requiring that everybody is meeting the requirements of IDEA. So making sure that we are carrying out the focus and the intent of this law. In doing so, it does indicate that the secretary needs to specifically focus on whether or not children are receiving FAPES in their LRE. So focus on free and appropriate education, focus on LRE, and then focus on states having a general supervisory role in the implementation of IDEA for themselves. So basically, she is supposed to ensure that we're doing what the law is supposed to do and that states know how to do that as well. General oversight. Okay, moving on to 1416B. The title of this subpart is State Performance Plans. So we've got 1 and 2 under state performance plans. So the first thing is number 1 is called plan, number 2 is called targets. So number 1 is that when IDEA was reauthorized in 2004, they said, hey, states, you need to put together something that we are going to call a performance plan. And this performance plan has to evaluate your effectiveness, your quote unquote efforts to implement the requirements and purposes of IDEA. And then you also have to tell us how you're going to improve your current performance. States have to give that to the federal Department of Education at least every 6 years. Okay, so those plans have to be revised every 6 years. And then number 2 is called targets. So essentially, what they have to do is they have to collect data. They have to set out targets that say, this is what we're going to track. And then they have to say, here's how we're going to measure it. So obviously, it has to be specific and measurable, just like an IEP goal. And then they have to report that back to their public at least annually. And you've seen this data. I am on the SAPAC, the State Advisory Panel for Exceptional Children in Kentucky. One of the things that the SAPAC does is we look at this data before it goes out. So we look at the data sets and we approve it. In actuality, I think in many states, it is a rubber stamp thing. But, we look at the different indicators and what the data is going to say on a somewhat regular basis so that we can check it off for the Department of Ed. So you can look at both your plan and at your state's publishing on a regular basis. Most of them, I would say, would almost definitely be on their website, but they have to make it available for the public. So it's got to be posted publicly someplace. I Googled in order to find Kentucky's, which is where I live and practice law. The first thing that I Googled was Kentucky State Performance Plan Special Education. You could throw in IDEA if you don't find anything. And I came upon something called State Performance Plan / Annual. And I thought that's got to be it. I clicked on it, and sure enough, it is. So the title of the document that I found is State Performance Plan / Annual Performance Report, Part B. So now I know I'm right because 1416 is in Part B. And this is the thing called the State Performance Plan. And mine indicates that it is for the fiscal year of 2023. And so if it has to be redone every 6 years, I could mark my calendar for 2029, and I should be getting a new one for my state in 2029. Then for the data reporting, I Googled Kentucky Report IDEA Performance Targets. And then I went ahead and threw in indicator because targets and indicator are both used pretty often when we're talking about this data set that they have to publish. And the beginning of the website that I clicked on that ended up to be correct is called Public Reporting of IDEA Part B Data, Kentucky Department, and I assume it's going to say of Education. And I clicked on that, and sure enough, I found it. The title of this web page is Public Reporting of IDEA Part B Data. And there's all kinds of interesting data sets in here. So right now in Kentucky, you can get the data set for 2023. And I am recording this in May of 2025. And yes, I did have to just look at my computer to make sure that it was May because it is May and that's a crazy time. So the May data set is, let's see, or the 2023 data set. Yeah, I think all that's published to date in Kentucky is 2022. So there you have it. And you get things. It's really interesting to look at your stuff. Maybe we'll do a whole nother podcast episode on that because we can really get into the weeds on those two things. So that is what is in subsection B of 1416. Let's move on to subsection C, which is called approval process. This section is entitled Approval Process, and it basically says that once the states submit their plans to the Secretary of the Federal Department of Education, that person will read through the plans and review them. If they want to deny them, they have to give written notice with an opportunity to correct them. And if they don't respond at all, then it's deemed to have been accepted. So that's it. There's a little bit about the back and forth of getting it approved. But again, that's really nuanced. That's probably all you need to know about C. And then similarly, short and sweet in subsection D, we get an indication that the secretary has to look at the state reports on how they're doing on these special education uh, factors or indicators that they have set forth, and has to reply back saying that they either meet the requirements or that they need some kind of assistance, and then they develop a plan. And then in subchapter E, we get more info, or subsection E, we get more information about what happens if the state says, if the federal Department of Education says that states need more help. And you might know that your state is getting help from the federal Department of Education, or is like under the finger of the federal Department of Education because their numbers are not good, because they're not meeting their goals in these areas. So there's basically three categories that they can do. The feds can say that the states either need assistance, need intervention, or need substantial intervention. And there is a set of punishments, so to speak, that the federal Department of Education can implement on the states in order to do that. In order to get to this place, they have to have kind of failing marks 2 years in a row, and then the feds can step in and say, hey, we're going to help you. The help that they get is anywhere between offering technical assistance, suggesting experts, suggesting programs, all the way to withholding their money. You're not doing a good enough job. You haven't been doing a good enough job, and we're not going to give you any more federal funds. I don't know if the federal Department of Ed has ever said to any state departments of ed, hey, we're not going to give you any money. I would highly doubt it, but maybe that's true. Let me know if you know that that's happened in your state. So, this is one of the reasons why we need these technical assistance centers, because, like, the way that our Constitution works is the federal government has oversight and authority and, like, the structure. And then states, no matter what we're talking about, Department of Transportation, Department of Health, Department of whatever, states have autonomy to, kind of create their own rules, regulations, and laws that don't conflict with those federal laws. So within the federal framework, right? So, like, states fit as these puzzle pieces into the bigger federal framework. And so, but the federal government exists in part, at least in this specific reason, to provide technical assistance to states. So, our technical assistance centers have gotten defunded. They have gotten really, oh gosh, now I got balloons coming up. I don't know what I'm doing to tell them. Maybe I'm just gesticulating a lot. So, please do not let the balloons be an indicator that I am happy about the defunding of the different places within the federal Department of Education. So these technical assistance centers, I'm sorry, pardon me, the Trump administration has come through and cut places all throughout the federal government, but specifically within the Department of Education. So we are losing no thumbs up. I'm sorry that these thumbs up are happening. I feel like I'm just going to do a thumbs down this entire time, and that way we'll combat anything I do with anything else. Yeah, thanks. Now it got my thumbs down. So they are taking staff, they're reducing staffing significantly. They are reducing funding. They are proposing to reduce funding significantly. They are withholding grants to agencies and organizations and entities that used to be a part of this wheelhouse, right? That used to be a part of this framework. So, in order to provide technical assistance, for example, you have to do research, right? You can't just be like, uh, we think this particular curriculum works for kids with this particular set of needs because, it's got to be research based. And we know that because we read that previously in the law. So somebody's got to do the research. Well, the research branch is one of the ones that got gutted the most. So technical assistance is based on research, right? So, like, here's how all of these things kind of interplay and how they are founded in the law. Now, a conservative value, I think, is traditionally to restore power to the states. But you can see how if California and Wisconsin and Alabama are all researching what kind of math programs work for kids with specific learning disabilities and math calculation, we are reinventing the wheel 1,000 times over. And so, this need for federal oversight and implementation and training and general resources is pretty clear. So, not only that, but it's also in the law. So right now, it is legally mandated that states have this available to them if they are not able to meet the requirements that are mentioned in their plans. So that is E, which again is entitled enforcement. Okay, then we can go through the last few sections very quickly. F is state enforcement, that basically says if any local districts are interfering with the state's performance, the state can do, what they need to support the local district. G is rule of construction, which basically allows the federal secretary of the Department of Ed to continue to follow other laws, specifically those relative to general education. H is divided state agency responsibility, which really has to do with students that are eligible for IDEA protections that are incarcerated. And I is randomly put in here at the end. It's probably an amendment, although I don't know for sure. That's called Data Capacity and Technical Assistance Review, which says that the Secretary of the Federal Department of Education needs to look at the data sets and like the way that the states are taking data in order to ensure that it's going to mean something, that it's valuable, that they know what they're doing with data collection, and to the extent that they don't, has to offer technical assistance in setting goals, taking the data, reporting the data, and doing something with the data, basically. I don't know that it's that list specifically, but that's how I would take data, and I am no statistician. All right. That will wrap up section 1416. I hope I made it applicable enough. We are going to do section 1417 next, which is administration, and we're going to talk about things like what does the Secretary of the Department of Education actually do? I'll see you next week, same time, same place.